Hello everyone, today I bring you a video about the story of James and Diep. In the previous episode, James came face to face with a truth that left even him unable to remain at peace as before. It was not a secret that could be wrapped up in a few simple explanations, but a heavy fragment of the past, one that had stretched on for many years, concealed beneath silence, pity, and the selfish choices of adults. Diep's biological mother had not passed away as she had believed since childhood. She was still alive, still breathing under the same sky, but had chosen to leave her daughter behind to step into a different life, one of wealth, comfort, and complete separation from the child she had once carried and given birth to. A lie maintained for far too long had ceased to be mere protection, it had become a smoldering wound, never given a chance to heal. Meanwhile, Diep continued living her daily life with an outward calm. Every morning, she woke up early, prepared meals for little Nie, took her to school, then busied herself with work and countless nameless worries. When Nie cried because she missed her biological mother, Diep was always the first to pull the child into her arms, patiently comforting her with a gentle, warm voice. She allowed the child to call her mom, not to replace anyone, but simply to help the little girl feel less alone in moments of vulnerability. Yet Diep herself never allowed herself to be weak. After everything she had been through, she had grown used to hiding her sadness, to filling the empty spaces inside with responsibility and quiet endurance. No one realized that deep within her heart existed a vast emptiness, the emptiness of a daughter who had never been allowed to know the truth about her own mother. James saw all of this. He saw how Diep silently cared for others while forgetting herself. He noticed her daily smile, and also the fleeting moments when her gaze dimmed for just an instant before quickly returning to normal, as if nothing had happened. Because of that, James understood that his silence could no longer be called protection. It was unintentionally prolonging a lie and forcing Diep to continue living in an incomplete reality. He knew that if he kept hesitating, he himself would become complicit in that pain. In this episode, everything begins on a very ordinary evening, so calm that it was easy to let one's guard down. Little Nie had fallen asleep early, her small face peaceful in slumber, her steady breathing echoing softly in the dark room. The small house sank into its familiar quiet, with only the ticking of the wall clock marking the silent passage of time. Diep stood in the kitchen, tidying up bowls still warm with the scent of rice, her movements slow and practiced, habits repeated over many years. It was in that seemingly mundane moment that James called out to her. Not in his usual cheerful or relaxed tone, but with a noticeably subdued voice. Diep turned around and met his eyes that no longer carried their familiar lightness, but were filled with something heavy and hard to name. She paused instinctively, sensing that the conversation ahead would not be simple. James began to speak. He did not beat around the bush or try to avoid the truth. Each sentence, each word was spoken slowly, as if he needed to be certain that he was facing reality rather than running from it. He talked about his meeting with Diep's uncle, about words that seemed scattered at first but gradually formed a conflicted picture of the past. He spoke of the past relationship between his father and her mother, of the choices made at a time when no one considered the long-lasting consequences. And then, James said the most important, and the most difficult, thing of all. The truth Diep had never known throughout all those years. That her mother was still alive. Not somewhere impossibly far away, but living an entirely different life, completely detached from the memory of the daughter she once had. As those words echoed through the quiet space of the house, they were not merely sounds, they were fragments of an old belief beginning to shatter, signaling the emotions Diep would soon have to confront in the journey ahead. Diep was stunned. The first feeling that struck her was neither pain nor anger, but a terrifying emptiness. She stood motionless, her arms hanging loosely at her sides, her gaze fixed on some undefined point ahead, as if all the sounds around her had been cut off from her world. She didn't cry right away. No tears fell. Her body remained there, but her mind felt drained, no longer strong enough to react. Inside her head, only one question echoed, over and over, without pause, until it made her head buzz: if she's still alive, why did she never come back? That question needed no answer, because it carried too much pain within it. For years, Diep had lived with the belief that her mother had left this world, that the loss was something unchangeable. She had taught herself to accept it, convinced herself that her loneliness was something no one could alter. But now, knowing that her mother was still alive, all those efforts suddenly became cruelly fragile. If her mother was alive, then what were all those years Diep had grown up without love? A misunderstanding? Or a deliberate choice? James saw the change clearly on her face. He didn't rush her, nor did he interrupt the storm of thoughts swirling inside her. He knew that this moment was like a direct collision with the past, where wounds she thought had healed were being torn open once more. When Diep still said nothing, James spoke again. His voice no longer held its earlier steadiness. It trembled slightly, not from fear, but because he understood how deeply his words could hurt her. James said that he wanted to help her find her mother. Not to force her to forgive, and not to paint a beautiful ending for a story already filled with sorrow. He only wanted her to know the truth, to stand before the woman who gave birth to her and have the right to choose how to face her. He said Diep deserved to ask why. She deserved to blame, to be angry, even to cry out loud if she wanted to. And if, just if, there was still a tiny spark of hope in her heart, then she also deserved to hold her mother once, as a daughter who had never been given that chance. Those words were not advice, nor were they pressure. They were spoken with all the sincerity and caution James could muster in that moment. But the instant he finished speaking, Diep shook her head. Not a hesitant shake, but a strong, decisive one, as if she were trying to push away every possibility laid out before her. I don't need that. Her voice was noticeably hoarse, as though her throat had been constricted by an overwhelming emotion. Those 3 short words echoed in the quiet space of the house, simple on the surface, yet filled with utter exhaustion. Diep said she didn't want to look for someone who had willingly abandoned her. She didn't want to stand before a mother who had chosen a different life, one in which Diep had no place. She didn't want to hear any explanations, because no matter what the reason was, the truth remained the same: her mother had left, and Diep was the one left behind. She went on, her voice sinking lower, saying that she would rather believe her mother was dead than accept that she had been abandoned. At least death carried helplessness and the absence of choice. This departure did not. It was a decision. A conscious choice. And Diep didn't know how to face that. She had spent too many years building a shell thick enough, strong enough to survive, and she didn't want a belated truth to shatter everything she had fought to preserve. James stood there in silence, watching her. He didn't step closer, nor did he reach out to touch her, because he knew that at this moment, any comfort could become a burden. He forced himself to suppress the emotions rising in his chest, just to remain clear-headed enough to listen. He understood that the truth does not always bring release. Some truths, once exposed, only make the pain sharper, clearer, and harder to escape. In that moment, inside the quiet little house, both of them fell silent. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because there was too much, and neither knew where to begin. And that silence, heavy and lingering, seemed to signal that what had just been spoken was only the beginning of an emotional journey filled with even more turmoil waiting ahead. That night, Diep said she was tired and asked to go to her room earlier than usual. Her voice was soft and even, carrying no obvious emotion, as if everything that had happened earlier had been nothing more than an ordinary conversation. James watched her figure disappear behind the bedroom door, but he didn't call her back or ask another question. He understood that some wounds cannot be touched by words, and even less can they be healed by haste. Some pain needs to be alone, to find its true shape within the heart of the one who bears it. The house gradually sank into the familiar stillness of late night. The living room lights were turned off, leaving only a few dim streaks of light spilling out from the hallway. The gentle, steady breathing of little Nee could be heard from the next room, peaceful and rhythmic, like a world completely separate from the turmoil unfolding in the adults' hearts. James lay down and closed his eyes, but sleep did not come right away. Diep's words echoed in his mind, along with her decisive shakes of the head and the look in her eyes as she tried so hard to remain calm that it made his heart ache. Only when the entire house had truly fallen asleep did Diep quietly open her eyes. She slowly sat up, as if afraid of disturbing the space around her. The room was dim, lit only by faint moonlight slipping through the window and gently touching the floor. Diep curled herself at the edge of the bed, her legs drawn together, her back slightly hunched, her arms wrapped tightly around an old blanket she had kept for many years. The blanket was no longer new, its edges worn, but it carried a familiar comfort, like the only thing she could cling to at that moment. There was no one there. No little Nee for her to gently hold and soothe, as she had done so many times before. No James for her to rest her head on, where even silence could become comfort. The room felt larger than usual, so empty that every breath Diep took echoed clearly in her own ears. She realized that some pain only appears when one is completely alone, no longer needing to hold oneself together for anyone else. Diep began to cry. Silently. Without sobbing. She bit her lip tightly, forcing back every sound, as if making even the smallest noise would cause everything she was holding onto to collapse completely. Tears quietly spilled over, falling onto the blanket she was clutching, soaking into the worn fabric. No one saw it, no one heard it, but the pain was unmistakably suffocating, like an invisible hand tightening around her chest. She missed her mother. But this longing was not gentle, not filled with memories of embraces or lullabies. It was not like the longing little Nee felt, crying out for her mother and then being comforted in Diep's arms. This was a vague, aching longing, the longing of a child who had never been chosen, never been kept. Diep realized that throughout all her years of growing up, she had always quietly waited for something that never came. A return. An explanation. A hope that, no matter how late, she had once held a place in the heart of the woman who gave birth to her. She remembered the times when little Nee cried because she missed her mother, the moments when Diep sat beside her, gently wiping away tears and patiently comforting her. Back then, Diep always believed that as long as she was there, as long as there was an embrace, any sadness would eventually fade. And now, in this dark room, she suddenly understood something that made her heart ache. When you cry because you miss your mother, you still have me by your side. Diep whispered to herself, her voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the air. Those words had once been comfort she gave to someone else, but now they returned to her, striking directly at the emptiness in her own heart. But when I cry because I miss my mother, I'm all alone. The words faded into the quiet of the late night. Diep lowered her head, letting her hair hide her tear-soaked face. She sat there for a long time, how long, she didn't know, only knowing that she had never felt loneliness so clearly before. In the prolonged silence, Diep understood that this pain would not disappear quickly, and that what James had said that night had touched a wound far deeper than she had ever imagined. That night passed slowly, leaving behind a lingering ache in her heart, foreshadowing emotions she had yet to find words for, waiting just ahead. Outside, James stood silently before the half-closed bedroom door. The hallway light cast a faint, elongated glow over his figure, making his shadow on the floor look even more solitary. He didn't lean closer to the door, nor did he turn away and leave. James simply stood there, motionless, as if any movement at that moment would be unnecessary. From behind the fragile door, he heard very soft sounds, almost swallowed by the darkness of the night, the muffled, broken, trembling sobs, barely audible, yet enough to make his heart tighten. James closed his eyes. His hand clenched, then slowly loosened, as if he were struggling with himself. All it would take was for him to push the door open, just one embrace, one sentence, and perhaps Diep wouldn't have to cry alone anymore. But he didn't do it. Not because he didn't care, and certainly not because he was indifferent. On the contrary, it was precisely because he cared so deeply that he stopped at that threshold. James understood that some pain, if touched too soon, only causes deeper wounds. Some tears need to fall in solitude, so that the one who sheds them can keep going the next day. He knew that right now, Diep didn't need advice, nor did she need someone to explain what was right or wrong. She needed to face her own pain, in her own way. And James, though standing very close, could only choose to remain on the other side of the door, quietly becoming an invisible support, rather than stepping in and unintentionally taking away her right to hurt. That night passed slowly. Outside, a gentle wind stirred the treetops, carrying a faint rustling sound that blended into the stillness of the house. No one slept deeply. Diep remained inside, curled up in a longing and a loss she had never been able to name. James stayed outside, leaning against the wall, letting helplessness seep into every breath. Two people, two separate spaces, yet sharing the same heavy burden they could not fully ease for one another. That night, the secret was spoken. It no longer lay hidden in the darkness of the past, no longer covered by years of silence. James's words, no matter how gentle or heavy, no matter how carefully chosen, had reached the deepest place in Diep's heart. But along with that truth, another wound began to surface. Not a completely new wound, but an old one, once concealed, once believed to have healed, now starting to bleed again, slowly and persistently. Diep was still there, with a pain she hadn't yet found words for. James was still there too, with questions that had no answers. Would he continue searching for Diep's mother in silence, as a quiet way of protecting her, or would he stop to respect the choice Diep was desperately clinging to? And would Diep be strong enough one day to face the truth she was trying so hard to deny, or would she continue to hide within the fragile belief she had built just to survive? Those questions had no answers that night. They hovered in the quiet air, drifting along with the slow passage of time, waiting for the right moment to be answered. What comes next will gradually be revealed in the next episode, when emotions that have yet to settle are forced to find their way into the light. Don't forget to follow along to continue accompanying James and Diep on this journey, full of pain, full of inner conflict, yet deeply human, where every choice leaves its mark, and every truth carries its own price.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Nay mình đang làm video với Cảm ơn mọi người đã theo dõi video của mình. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở video sau.